What's up, gamers? Welcome to episode 14 of Business Casual Gamers Podcast. And as always, this is the podcast focused on gamers with families, jobs, and we have things to do, don't we, Aaron?
We do. I've done a couple real things, both today and for the past couple weeks, so I feel accomplished.
Really? But did you do things on Monday? Monday was 4th of July, big holiday for America here.
I let other people do stuff for me, such as explode things and allow me to watch them. So that was pretty much the extent of my Monday.
That's great. Very, very good. As always, you can find us on businesscasualgamers.com. That's your one-stop shop for all of our links to YouTube, Twitter, all the things for us. Please follow us on Twitter at BISCasualGamers. That's at BISCasualGamers. You can also rate us on iTunes. Please take the time, if you listen to us on iTunes or on Google's podcasting site, please rate us. That really, really helps us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you like the things we're doing. We're putting out basically every other week. We're putting out a retro rerun or some other things as well. I have some hardware stuff on the way in the near future, hopefully. Waiting on trying to find some things on eBay. So once we find those, we'll have some more hardware stuff. And as always, you can find this podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, you obviously know that. But otherwise, you can find the video version of this podcast on YouTube as well. You can find us through that link at businesscasualgamers.com. But with that, let's jump into our discussion topic of the week. And this topic is actually a very interesting one. Aaron has been hard at work kind of thinking about some applicability for this topic. And Aaron, do you want to introduce it for us?
Absolutely, Chris. So we talked in one of our game assignments recently. Chris has been singing the praises of the newly released Overwatch. And it's part of that, it kind of sparked a conversation between us about just competitive games in general. I think both of us on one of our past episodes, we talked a lot during your kind of retrospective or your review on your experience with Overwatch about, is this the kind of game that has legs for multiple years, where it's really going to carry on and you're going to see a following and a support base that could really kind of propel this into that elite tier of games where they've got not just a following from the player base, but you've got people watching games being played. You know, it's beyond just people playing the game. And it kind of got me thinking of exactly how far the hobby has come in terms of what the competitive game scene is really like. Mm-hmm. So to kind of go back to the humble beginnings from when Chris and I were growing up, a couple of early examples. And I remember my first real foray into competitive gaming was the first time that I went over to a friend's house and played the now famous Street Fighter II World Warrior. And I remember I never heard of the game before. I had a Super Nintendo at the time, but the whole fighting genre was pretty much new to me at the time. And all I remember at the time, I didn't have my character, right? I just kind of picked whoever seemed interesting at the time. I think Blanca, it's like, hey, this guy looks green. Let's go with it. He can electrocute himself. But I just remember going up against a friend of mine who played Dalsim, and you're like, wait a minute, he can reach halfway across the screen? Like, this is completely OP. This game's broken. This is dumb. But I also remember taking away from that this feeling of, I'm going to come back. I'm going to buy this game. I'm going to come back, and I'm going to figure out how to beat Dalsim. And it kind of became my mission in life to get good enough at this game to actually be able to beat one of my friends. And up until that point, certainly on the Nintendo, I can't remember a time. I mean, you had things back as early as Pong and things like that, but there wasn't anything that was really what I would call competitive, other than just kind of friendly back and forth competition. But Chris, what do you remember about kind of your beginnings with the first time you remember feeling competitive with a video game?
Yeah, there weren't a lot. Actually, I want to take a little bit of an aside because it's really funny. As you start talking about Street Fighter II, the music in the background started going in my head. And as you transition into the Blanca discussion, I hear like Blanca's like, you know, his like crazy screams as he ends up dying and things. I'm sure there are a whole bunch of you listening that had similar crazy flashbacks. But no, I think you're right. Street Fighter II for me, and granted, I don't think it was the actual first game that was kind of competitive in the space, but for me, it was the first one that I got into. Right. And in many ways, you know, we talked about this in the arcade episode where you know, a lot of these games, at least initially for a long period of time, Mortal Kombat and other ones like that, were primarily arcade games long before they came to the console, before they figured out a way to do it. But Street Fighter II was in the arcade. and on the console relatively quickly, I think. And it came to the point where, I wanted to be good. But, I mentioned back when we were in the arcade episode that I used to go to the mall every weekend. And one of the things we used to do is I used to go into these games and you want to have a good representation when you get there, right? You want to go practice at home with your character like Ken or whoever, and then you want to go into that arcade and, strut up to that arcade machine, put in those quarters, and if you could last a couple games you did a good job, right? And then there's always that person that defeats you. But, it's interesting because I think back then it was, like I said, and not to get too much into the arcade episode, kind of the flashback, but, back then there weren't a lot of easy ways to find codes, so figuring out moves wasn't super easy necessarily. Right. And certainly when it came to Mortal Kombat, you had those kinds of things with fatalities and such. But it was cool to see, how you can go out and you can play games in the console. And I know there was, the game, honestly, what I think made Street Fighter so good was that it was, unlike anything else, balanced. Yeah. Relatively. And you mentioned Dhalsim being OP, and that's right, but there were also some counters for Dhalsim. There were some, Chun-Li was actually very good in many cases, and, you even had some cases, you could argue, I guess, later on that Street Fighter kind of got a little bit more murky with respect to balance before they finally tried to pull it back in 4 and on. But at least in Street Fighter 2, it was actually pretty darn good. The only thing I'd say that I liked, being a speed gamer, I really wanted higher speeds. And I think that they really addressed that later on. But the slow fighting was something that was kind of interesting for me. I didn't quite get to it necessarily, but I did spend a lot of time trying to find my character. Like Guile was a really good one. Ken was a really good one, I already mentioned. Chun-Li was always fun to play. And then there were ones like Zangief that I just never really got into.
And to your point, back in the day, one of the things that I remember feeling a sense of accomplishment, just learning the special moves. Like the first time you did the Sonic Boom, you're like, all right, I look like I belong at least. Whereas if you look now, I mean, that's kind of like basic entry level move. You're kind of expected that you know what you're doing. You know how to execute a special move, and now the level of sophistication has grown, and we'll get into that a little bit later.
Too.
Absolutely,
you'd have 2 or 3 hit combos were actually pretty darn good for the average gamer. At that point. And I think it wasn't really until later on when you got to I guess, Killer Instinct really made the combo thing really, really strong. And now you think, we can talk about it in a second, obviously, but the game has changed quite a bit.
Right. And so I took all of the, I would say, skill, if you want to call it that, perceived skill, and transitioned that into an event so epic, certainly when you're 10 years old, that nothing else could quite compare to the now famous in the gaming community, the Blockbuster World Video Game Championships.
That's right.
Chris, are you familiar with this tournament?
I'm very familiar. Unfortunately, I could not attend.
Oh, you missed out. Now I will say, at the time, this was for those of you who weren't around. I mean, frankly, for those of you who don't even know what Blockbuster is, Blockbuster was this mythical place that actually rented video games in a brick and mortar store. And they had basically on the back of the Nintendo World Championships, they basically decided to host their own kind of version of that format. Mm-hmm. So basically, I don't know if it was all local Blockbusters, but all the, let's say, participating Blockbusters, they basically had consoles set up. There were Genesis tournaments, there were Super Nintendo tournaments at the time. And they had consoles set up, and you basically came in and you kind of had your time when a Blockbuster employee was going to set you up on one of the consoles, and you were going to compete in a series of games and, basically try to put up a high score, make the most progress, whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. And you were going to get ranked against your local Blockbuster compatriots. And I just remember one of my fondest memories at the time. So we got to play such gems. Well, one of them was a gem at least. We got to play the now vaunted series of Clay Fighter, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters, and NBA Jam, which you may or may not see Chris and I playing in the not too distant future.
It might end up happening.
But certainly at the time, you're sitting there in your local Blockbuster. You got maybe a couple people looking over your shoulder to see what's going on. And you're feeling the pressure to perform, right?
Oh, you have to.
You get your Air Dog code entered, so you make sure you've got your normal player, and you're like, all right,
Right.
It's time to get some slams and jams, because if I don't deliver, I'm going to be embarrassed in front of 2 other people at a Blockbuster that I've never met before.
This is like middle school and high school.
Right.
Like, this is real life, ladies and gentlemen. This is real life. Things matter back then.
Right.
The world is a very small place, and it's a very important place.
Yeah.
Like getting that C in a test is really, really a big deal.
And I just remember, so after week 1, and I can't remember whether Clay Fighter or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I think it was Clay Fighter that was first. They had a sign outside Blockbuster that had the top 10 players in magic marker on the top. Mm-hmm. And I remember hitting that number 9 slot.
Wow.
And then for that next week, you're just going like, I'm that
that's
guy.
Me.
That's me.
Right there.
Just saying.
Kind of a big deal.
Bad Mr. Frosty. Yeah, I'm pretty good. I know my way around, right? And I remember seeing one of the other guys in our class at the time. He was also on the list, and we didn't know each other that well, but it kind of sparks the conversation of like, you're in that elite club of Clay Fighter players, if there is such a thing. But I do remember
that's what's so kind of cool about it. It's sorry to interrupt, but this is what's interesting because the world was so different back then. Without the internet, wasn't really big. So like your world literally was the 100 or so people in your 10-mile radius or whatever that played games, right? So it's like you are the world champion at that point.
And you're exactly right, because I was garbage at those games. Let's be honest. I certainly practiced enough by renting a copy of Clay Fighter, right? So whatever you can get in your 3-day rental period, that was about my skill level. Did not own any of the games that we played. I think I owned NBA Jam after the fact. But that, to your point, the competitive world as you knew it were the people in a 5-mile radius from you.
Right.
And that was that people who were listening to this today that did not grow up in that environment, they can't fathom a world where you didn't have access or knowledge of who are the best players in the world. Yeah, and it's so different. Now, I'll take that on to what I'll call the live the dream moment for every budding child. I've talked or alluded to the what is probably really, if I broke it down, my favorite movie of all time, The Wizard. That end of The Wizard, where young Jimmy Woods, and Lucas Barton, of course, who we all wanted to win, but we know what happens. Them going to the Video Armageddon Championships in California. I remember watching that movie, and I have showed it to both of my sons at this point. Yeah, I've subjected them to the 1.5 hour long Nintendo commercial, and I'm just showing them a time of, look, that like the awkward kid finds the magic flute. Like, how does he know to find the magic flute? Nobody knew the magic flute. But when you're watching that movie, right, you really do put yourself in the shoes of like, what if I was that kid? What if I was the one who showed the world where the magic flute was on Super Mario 3? And I just look back at that and I'm like, at the time, that was pretty much the coolest possible thing you could have ever hoped to do in a competitive gaming environment.
What if I actually had the Power Glove and it actually worked? That's a big what if. But, you're right.
Can we break it out, Chris? Do we have the Power Glove?
I used to actually have it. I threw it away.
It never worked to begin with, so it's fine.
Yeah, I actually ended up cutting the cords off of it and using it, for other stuff. It's like we're gonna have to use it for a boxing glove or something. But if you haven't actually watched The Wizard, you're gonna hate us for saying this, but you probably should actually go watch it.
It's mandatory.
It is mandatory, but it is. I don't even know how to describe it. You might cry your way through it in a very bad way.
It's epic. It's got Christian Slater in his sober days, right?
But yeah, it was really funny because that movie was great because it was such a good advertisement because at the time we hadn't seen you're right, the competitive scene was almost non-existent back then for games. And to see this, we had Nintendo World Championship around that time, or maybe a little bit earlier, and you had The Wizard come out, which depicts this kind of a championship and the road, the trek across, the world effectively, right, the U.S. to try and figure out who's going to be the best. And then they unveil this crazy new game you've never seen before, Super Mario Brothers 3, and everyone's crazy about it, and everyone has to have it, and so on. And they had plenty of product placement, like the Power Glove and all that in there. But it was a cool. I give them props, number one, for doing it. But number two, it is interesting to see how they started to inject that, right? And so you had the arcades that were already present there, where you had some level of either cooperative play or competitive scene. But now, it kind of throws us, pushes us effectively into this competitive scene where now, you're right. You want to be that guy that's going to win. You want to be number one. You want to be the one that finds this flute in this game no one's ever seen before, this brand new game. You want to be you need to be someone with it. I think that's certainly something that we started to see as a seed. Maybe it goes so far as to say this is probably the first, mass media, for lack of a better term, introduction of competitive gaming into the scene and kind of giving us the idea, hey, this can be more than just me and my buddy playing double dribble and whoever wins the game, no one cares,
exactly.
Right?
And one of the things I will say, and we're going to talk a little bit about what the next step is, what the next evolution of what competitive gaming has kind of gone on to be. I just want to put it out there for anybody who's looking to sponsor my dream, because it is. And I've told my boss this, just to put it out there, full disclosure for you, the viewers and listeners. If all I ever want to be when I grow up is Lucas Barton, if somebody would sponsor me to live in the back of a gas station, have a posse full of kids wearing Vision streetwear, whose only job in life is to taunt local travelers and talk about me at local cafes and fetch me a cold beverage when I get mad because I just lost or got flustered, and then break out my Power Glove that's in my own private case and tell people that I know every single game on a console. If that job comes along, I'm telling you right now, I'm out. Whatever I'm doing, we're done. We're moving on. Sponsorship spots are available. Please contact me. BusinessCasualGamers.com. All the info if you're interested.
That would kind of end the BCG, wouldn't it? We'd be kind of like fake BCG people if we we have jobs playing video games every day.
Right. So since we can't do that, and this will never happen, let's talk about where we went from there. So when you get into the kind of the, I would say, late 90s, but certainly in the 2000s, where you get the advent of the internet, that's starting to come around. You see some genres that were, the genres have been around, but you see a lot of genres emerge because of the online play. And the one that jumps out to me, and Chris, I know we've talked in past podcasts, and you can touch on some other genres. You were much more of a PC gamer and were in on that much earlier than I was, and still am, frankly. But the first thing that ever caught my attention in the online scene was competitive StarCraft, and what South Korea was doing in both, I would say, the skill level, certainly. I mean, the skill level, there were great StarCraft players all over the world, but in terms of the spotlight that got put on South Korean StarCraft players, there was nothing like that in the world, where you were having arenas filled up, you were having television, commentary, all of the things that they did to kind of elevate gaming from just, hey, you want to watch some really good players at your local arcade, or do you want to be able to watch a replay online to just understand how to play? I mean, this was a spectacle unlike anything I had ever seen, and that was really the first time that my attention was caught of, wow, competitive gaming is not what I thought it was. Like, this has changed. Well, talk to me about some of your early, because I know PC was really where I would say this new movement started catching on. What were some of the early standouts to you? Yeah,
for me, it was, it goes all the way back to like Wolfenstein and Doom and, Hexen.
Right.
I remember Hexen. It was a great game. And all these, keep in mind, this was way back when you had modems were the primary, over phone lines, were the primary means of communicating. Right. And I had like a 2400 baud modem, and you connect to a local BBS. I think I still remember the one that was locally for us was called Altered Reality. It was
remember it.
Awesome. And so you connect, and this is the first, like, before really the internet became a big thing. You connect to these BBSs, and you use these to try and find people that want to play like Hexen together or play Doom together and whatever. And admittedly, the experience was kind of awful back then. But I still remember playing a heck of a lot of online Doom 2, and it wasn't necessarily competitively to the same pro gamer kind of thing we're talking about now. But really, it was, you were there to get the many frags. You were there to really win, and that certainly was exacerbated, I guess, or bolstered by the fact that when Quake 3 came out, really large, really big game. I loved Quake 3. The entire thing, Quake 3 Arena, right? It's there, whether you have bots involved or you're online, and certainly you had, usually in the Quake 3 timeframe, you started getting a little bit more like DSL, cable modem, those kinds of more persistent connections to the internet. and that really helped make it really better. But I think one thing I will mention back to the RTS thing and so the StarCraft stuff. It's interesting to see how Korean culture allowed us to start changing the way we thought about video games.
Interesting, yeah.
I think because you mentioned these big tournaments and these big stars, and while many people would look overseas even today and say they're kind of a little bit too crazy about their video games, it started to help legitimize the things that we were doing here. Because you can keep in mind, back in the early '90s, and you even see it in The Wizard, right? Nerds, like people think you were a nerd, and that's not a positive thing. You like many things, you keep a couple, many of us learn in various social situations that you keep, certain things behind. You don't really make them, you don't give them a lot of external, mirroring or whatever. You don't talk to them about them a lot.
Sure.
And video games, my love for video games is something that I shared with my friends like you when we came over.
Yeah.
When we played, but I didn't go to school. I wouldn't dream of going to school in like a Mario shirt necessarily because, oh man, you're a nerd. Why don't you go out and play some baseball or some football or whatever? And so I think now that really helped start this train that has only taken, it's really taken 10, 15, 20 years now to really become mainstream where you look up and you're like, oh my gosh. We talked about this before. A lot of people play games. All the way from, 10 years old all the way to 60s plus. A lot of people play video games and enjoy video games, and it's no longer kind of a taboo to say, I'm a gamer. I go home and I play a game. And they did, I think they did a lot. They did a lot to help move that along.
And I totally agree. And one of the things that I found so cool about certainly what South Korea was doing, and I don't mean to give them all the credit, because to your point, Quake 3 was very big at the time. You had, Fatality. I remember hearing about, you see like news stories about him. But Korea, I think, was doing things that I remember at the time. I had one of my friends, one of my future college roommates, he had a roommate at the time that he was playing Age of Empires, right? Real-time strategy game. Certainly that was one of the genres that we'll talk about where this is caught on. But very casual player, but I remember showing him, and this is back early 2000s, I remember showing him one of the competitive StarCraft videos, and he didn't even know that this was out there. Like, he had no concept that halfway across the world, you even had a culture that was this deep into both learning the games, but then making that
filling
kind
stadiums.
Of public. He had no idea that existed. And it gave me, as a gamer, somebody who did follow this stuff and who was really captivated by it, it gave me something to send to people who, like games, but really you didn't have anything up until that point to send to them to say, hey, if you're interested, maybe you want to take this to the next level. Even if you're not going to play or actually be somebody who competes at that level, being part of the community that appreciates this and watches and supports this, to me, that's just as important as the players themselves who really want to devote their lives to getting better at these types of games. But I just remember that was kind of the first time where it really woke me up to, here's what's possible and where we can go with this. Now, I will say, kind of transitioning to some of the other genres that were starting to get big at the time. We talked about fighting games earlier. I mean, that audience, I would say, it kind of went up and down depending on what games were out at the time. You always had, I think, as the arcade culture still existed, fighting games were still kind of in that space, but certainly not online yet. So it was still very much of a local meta. You started to see real-time strategy pick up. Certainly the first-person shooters were coming along. That genre was really starting to establish itself. It's not just, Doom's been around, Wolfenstein's been around forever, but that was kind of the first time where, like you said, you really had the competitive scene come along.
Yeah, you started seeing things like Warcraft and Command & Conquer. I remember Command & Conquer Red Alert was the one that I played a heck of a lot of online. And I think you're right. You start seeing these like iconic games come out of every one of these genres that all started to have that online component to them because we're figuring out how to do the netcode to make this stuff work right. And out of that, it's breeding this really interesting competitive scene. Whether it's competitive scene from I guess there's a difference between like keeping track of scores and rankings and stuff like that, but just playing a lot and recognizing that, hey, this guy is really good at this game. He's probably one of the best in the world.
Right. And that's the joke is I look back to, if you look at the Blockbuster Championships and how they scored that, right? When I think of a fighting game now, I think of Evolution, that tournament. We'll talk about that in a little bit. but you think of people going head-to-head in bracketed tournament play, and the person who wins in the finals, that's going to be the person that's the champion. Well, in the Blockbuster Championships, you were going up to the console by yourself, and you were trying to put up a high score, essentially, and get as far in the game on a single-player mode as possible. And I look back on that, and I just kind of scratch my head and say, I can't even tell you when the last time I thought of a high score in a fighting game, or even in NBA Jam. I mean, it is a sport. There is a score. But when I'm playing NBA Jam, I just want to score more points than the other guy. I don't really care how many points. Of course, I'll take as many slams and jams as I can get, but I'm not ranking myself or measuring myself based on how many points I can put up. And back at the time, I look back on that memory and say, like, gosh, how off were people in terms of what they were expecting from the community? But you touched on a couple of the genres, and what really, I think, survived the test of time. After you saw, I remember back like when Golden Tee was the thing, and you'd get every place with the ridiculous Golden Tee machine of the guy who'd like wind up as hard as he could and put full body
one
motion.
Of those weird ping pong things where they're doing like a backhand. Yeah,
you get people who were up all night, stumbling into broken marriages at 5 a.m, telling them they bet the car on the Golden Tee match at the local pub. But all of that stuff I think is come and gone. And what you saw when the dust settled and kind of where we are now in the competitive landscape is really 4 genres, as I'll lay it out. You've got the fighting games that, as we've kind of talked about, you've got certainly the real-time strategy. There's a couple notable titles, but that is still a big genre.
Right.
You've got all of the MOBA or the arena games. Certainly, you look at the League of Legends and whatnot. Stuff has picked up and become huge. Even World of Warcraft. The player versus player
stuff.
and then you've also got first-person shooters, which as a genre has never been bigger. I think that certainly that probably among all of these, I would say that is probably from a console perspective, that is certainly the biggest genre that there is. You look at all the top-selling games, you look at the Call of Duties, you look at Halos. Those are the system sellers of every generation. But really what's interesting to me and what I want to talk about a little bit and get your take on, Chris, because you have certainly been in the PC area much more than I have, I would say that in terms of which side of the house between console games and PC games, where has the success in competitive gaming really come from a global scale? I really think the PC genres are the ones that have taken over. What have you seen, and why has that really garnered so much more attention than consoles?
Undoubtedly, I think that it's largely because a couple of things. Number one, the roots of online gameplay have always come from PCs. So I mentioned, back when you had modems and all of that, the Dreamcast had a modem. You had some like NetEurose stuff you could do for the PlayStation systems or whatever, but there weren't really good options for connecting to an internet or to some network on consoles. And the ones that did have them were admittedly very, lacking in many cases. And so I think that, I grew up playing, old school games on my PC. Certainly with FPS, the keyboard and mouse is just the best way because you can easily change the sensitivity of the mouse to figure out exactly how you want to play, and that kind of methodology where you have the your hand on the keyboard and then your mouse working were all very important pieces to helping make sure you were effective at it.
Right.
And I think that's probably what continued to make it big, and the fact that it was more accessible as well. You didn't, for a PC, you didn't have to go out and buy some crazy license from some system, and get it tested up and down, whatever, blah, blah, blah. You could actually put out, effectively, if you have a good publisher, or maybe the lack of a good publisher, you could put out a steaming pile of junk if you really want to.
Right.
And just it's easy for developers to build. The netcode's really, really easy. It's understood. It's, you could really work with it better. And I think all those factors really combined are the reason why just the accessibility and the usability and all of that made it very easy for PC to be the big winner here. And I think it's kind of interesting to see. One other side point I did want to make here was this is right around the time when we're talking about these games coming out where you've gone from that kind of a small mindset, the altered reality, the small BBSs where you're playing your friends and you realize that you're the best of your friends. It's kind of the same kind of thing that all of us go through, I think. in high school or whatever, where you think you're valedictorian of your high school or whatever,
Right.
you got a 4.0 GPA or a 4.6 GPA, you're doing great, whatever, and then you go to college and you get smacked because guess what? There are 20,000 other people just like you that are just as smart or smarter. You know, you got to the same sense where you're like, oh, I'm the best Quake 3 player here, and then, oh, now I'm introduced to this world of new players, and guess what? Of the 20 million more people, whatever, that are playing this game out there, I am definitely not even
I'm squarely in the noob tier.
Squarely in the noob tier. And I think that's probably what has started to help ramp us into this real competitive rise, where like you start seeing, StarCraft is a perfect example, where you have some big name players like Huck and TLO and guys that have played SC2 for years, and granted, many of them have moved on. But you start seeing them emerge as these clear winners at a global scale now.
Right, exactly.
And that's what you saw Wreckful do the same thing with World of Warcraft. And even today, a lot of the people that played with Wreckful, and I could probably name 4 or 5 other World of Warcraft arena, kind of 2v2 and 3v3 arena teams and players who are considered pro gamers, that wherever game they go, they're considered to be one of the best at what they do.
Right. And what's interesting about that, I'll kind of differentiate between where I think two movements are headed. You have what I'll call the fan-led or the community-driven organized tournaments. So the one that stands out to me that I look forward to every year is the Evolution, the fighting game tournament. I watch it. I don't watch every game, but I make it a point to sit down and spend some quality time, and I'll watch replays of matches. I've grown up with the fighting game genre, and I just really think that is a cool event. Now, all of that is fan-led, right? It's not sponsored. I know that Capcom's gotten a little bit more involved in trying to help. I know some of the other fighting game companies that have new games that they're trying to push, and kind of, they know that's where they've got to go, and if they don't sell to that community, that is their market. So there's starting to be a little bit more involvement from the developers of these games, but those are largely just really passionate fans who have tried to reach out to other really passionate fans to create a gathering and an event that's kind of worthy of their skill level. And it's been amazing to watch. I still have some of my favorite competitive fighting game memories. I'll never forget the Justin Wong and Daigo Umehara, the Street Fighter 3 Ken versus Chun-Li match, where you're just sitting there and you watch him parry the 18-hit Chun-Li combo and get the win. Stuff like that it's so amazing to watch. And it's got, I would say, a fairly large online audience. People know about it. They look forward to it. You get people that even travel. But when I compare that, and another game, I think Smash Brothers is another similar fighting game that garners that level of attention. But I think that largely the fighting game community is still kind of your local, hey, let's get a bunch of people together at your local, even, I go to a board gaming store where they have monthly tournaments for Smash Brothers. But it's still very much largely, like you said, here's the best person in your neighborhood. And there's been online play added to most of these games. Contrast that, though, to the PC market, where it is just, you look at League of Legends, you look at StarCraft 2 that we've mentioned a lot. It is unbelievable when you look at the team sponsorships, you look at people who are now sustaining themselves as professionals, you look at the teams that have formed around this, where people, in South Korea has probably been doing this longer than anybody, where you get people in dorms who are practicing 12, 18 hours a day, whatever it takes.
Houses and
it's unbelievable. And I kind of look at that and say, like, wow, I having been somebody that didn't really play PC games quite as much, StarCraft 2 and StarCraft were probably exceptions to that. I really, especially when I saw League of Legends, I had no idea that it was at that level, or some of these games were sustaining that kind of a fan base. What have your interactions been with some of the, I'll call it the viewing of modern competitive PC games?
Yeah, I really, looking at all these games, for one, let me step out and say I've played League of Legends a little bit, which I know is blasphemy for some people who've not.
I've never played it, so it's fine.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how big MOBAs have become in this space. And one thing I see across all of these types of games, like the StarCraft games, like the RTS, the MOBAs, the FPSs, what's been interesting to me, and one of the things that I've taken away from this is not the fact that these guys are really good, because they are really good. Yeah. It's how they approach the game. and it's kind of you have to go with me here for a second.
Sure.
So you think about some games, a lot of these games at this level require a certain amount of finesse, I'd say.
Absolutely.
Right. And so like StarCraft 2, it's not about, in many games, I would argue, it's not about trying to get as big of an army as possible and blowing them over as quickly as you can or rushing them down or anything like that. It's about playing off of what they're doing. It's about, picking your battles, running away when you have to run away, giving away some skirmishes so that you can win the overall war. And you see the same thing out of League of Legends and other related games where there's a lot of back and forth, and there's a lot more, I guess, what's the term? Just I'm having a hard time coming up with the term here, but really it's just the perseverance they have and the thought process they have in going through these matches. It's somewhat counterintuitive in many ways, because when we used to play these games years ago, like Street Fighter, that was really valid in the very beginning, just to smash, hard kick or whatever as much as you want.
I'm gonna jam Hadokens until you stop me.
Right. But now, people used to think back then that you just use Hadokens all the time, over and over and over again. And eventually, you're going to win. But then you start realizing the finesse players come in and realize, oh, well, there's an easy or relatively simple way to get around that tactic. And for every one of these cheap tactics, even in StarCraft 2, you see like 6 pools or whatever, really quick Zerg rushes. If you can scout that and you understand that it's happening, there are easy ways to shut that down relatively quickly. And that's what I got from all of this. It's not necessarily the game they're playing. It's not necessarily the specifics of that genre or anything like that. It's the fact that they stop and consider all aspects at every point. So they're considering the options they have. And they take these very methodical steps about how they're going to react to it. And what you end up finding is some very counterintuitive responses to things that actually end up being optimal in the end.
Right.
And for the speed gamer in me, and we'll talk a bit more about speed gaming in a minute, I think, but the speed gamer in me looks at that and says, there's some sort of crazy eloquence to this entire process here, where it's like, it's very compelling to see how these people have turned this into a game of nuance and very careful consideration.
Yeah. And one of the things, and I want to touch on this and certainly get you, the audience, to interact with us and give us your thoughts. Right. Our podcast is centered around, obviously, we are the business casual gamers. And as part of that, I think it's obvious. If it's not obvious, I'll go ahead and say it. Neither Chris or myself are going to be the type that you're ever going to see on a StarCraft cast of being, this is somebody who lives in a dorm and plays StarCraft for 16 hours a day and they're, diamond tier. But certainly I want to talk about what is our interaction, or what do we both contribute and get from the competitive gaming scene and community. And one of the things you touched on is, when I look back, and I think Street Fighter 2 was the first game where I really noticed this. When I kind of go back to my childhood mindset of what should I be doing when I approach a match in Street Fighter when I was 10 years old versus when I, fast forward 20 plus years, when I watch videos that explain the strategy for a character. And I remember, I think about a couple of years, that's probably a little bit more than that, but when the Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix, however many words got bolted on the end of that title, when it came out, I wanted to kind of go back and saddle up. And I decided, I remember at the time, you see tier lists of here for fighting games, here's the best character, the worst character. So what I remember doing is, I think Blanca was rated as the lowest tier character, and I went through and said, okay, I'm going to pick the lowest tier character, I'm going to learn this character, and I'm going to see what I can do. And I remember watching videos that were, pro gamers put out there saying, this is how you need to approach the character, these are his strongest moves, these are the characters he's strong against and weak against. And I was playing the game in a totally different way once I had that information than I ever was when I was a kid. And I wasn't trying to jam the electricity as much as possible. I was doing combos where it's like, okay, well, if I do this roll, I can get behind them and use the bite combo, and they can't turn around and block me. And there's stuff like that where I'm like, I had no idea this even existed. And to your point, it totally changed my approach to how I played the game. Now, even though I'm not going to get at a skill level of an elite Blanca player, it makes me a better player just knowing fundamentals, like you said, of how do they approach this? What's the mindset that they're looking for when they approach a character, when there's a new version of this that's released? How do they try to wrap their brain around what's good, what's not? how to counter other characters. And certainly when you go into, you mentioned Overwatch, and we'll certainly talk about that in a little bit in our next segment because I think it's very applicable. You try to approach, what do I need to be doing in this MOBA? What are team compositions? What are some things that I need to be doing to be an effective contributor? And I just think that having that pro gamer movement, it's really given me a new passion when I approach some of these competitive games for really, even if I know I'm not going to be able to put the time in to get to their skill level, I just love hearing the discussion that goes into the strategy behind these games.
Right. You're probably going to laugh, or people will probably laugh at me, but I think there are actually some life lessons to be learned in a lot of this as well on how you approach these kinds of things. And so, you think about Overwatch, for example, these kinds of games where you kill a player or whatever, and you see this. Actually, you see this in a lot of these types of games where it might be the option. I guess the overarching kind of statement is don't die in these games. Right? If you don't die, you're going to be okay. Well, you start thinking about things like trades, for example. So if I'm going to guarantee that I'm going to die, but I can trade for two of your players in a very strategic position, that might be advantageous. Or if I can trade me as a damage dealer for you as a healer, that's going to be helpful as well in many ways. Or, other kinds of things. If I can draw you away, if I can use one of our 6 players and draw 3 of their players off the point to go do something, that's advantageous to them as well.
Right.
And it's all these kinds of interesting thoughts about how you might approach problem sets. I mean, obviously, the game is there, so you take your weapons and you shoot your other players and you kill them, and then eventually you win. But that's not, there's so much more depth there that's not extremely obvious initially. And these players bring out that level of I guess, efficiency and interesting, a kind of approach to things, which is, again, why I mentioned speedrunning as well. Speedrunning in many ways is a competitive game. And if you can, shave a tenth of a second off of something by doing something this way versus another way, it might be better. There are many games, in fact, many runs where you die immediately to reset a game, or you die, like in Blaster Master, for example, you die at the end of a boss level as you're leaving to get you back to the very beginning of the dungeon, and that skips a whole bunch of time, or saves a whole bunch of time. So I just think it's very interesting to think about how all this really brings a new way of thinking to things, and I found that if you apply the same level of methodical thinking, as insane as it sounds, that these people apply when they play these games, if you apply this to real life, like you have a problem at work or a problem at home or whatever, and you stop and think about all the alternatives for how you can make these quote-unquote trades in life, right? Maybe it's something as simple as, I'm not going to go the most efficient way home from work, but that's going to have less traffic because, it's not the obvious way to go. Maybe I'll get home quicker. Well, that's kind of interesting, and apply. It's a kind of obviously a toy example, but it does matter. And I think there's a lot you can be gained from people. And obviously you can apply these very same comments to other types of competitive or interesting area, or I guess areas where people spend a lot of time really understanding a topic or an approach. But I think the gaming scene in particular has gotten really good at this, because these games, like these pro gamers, are so good at understanding like the StarCraft 2 nuances. You listen to these guys, we talked about it before, play this game 300 APM, and the ones that are really good that will talk to you as they play it, and they say, well, I'm not seeing him build whatever, but he's about 2 drones down or whatever he should have been. So I got to check for an expansion, because those guys had to have gone somewhere. Or, and when you get to the point where you have 2 of these players who are as good as one another, and they are queuing off of the smallest little things, like, well, it's suboptimal to put his hatchery there. Why did he do that? There's got to be a reason, and they'll figure the reason out. That stuff is so interesting to me, and it's, as an intellectual thought process, that's really cool. I think it's another tangential piece that they bring to this.
No, I agree. And one of the things, and I'll branch into what you were talking about earlier in real life, about probably 3 years or so ago, I got back into I obviously love video gaming, but it kind of spurred me to go back into both board and card gaming, right? We both grew up playing different collectible card games, Magic among those. But I got back in and started playing Netrunner, fantastic game that I've been playing for a while, and playing it competitively. And what was interesting to me is a lot of these same principles that I took away from video games of this is how you need to learn the game and understand the fundamentals of what do you need to be doing. Honestly, I don't get a lot of reps in terms of the amount of time I have to play the game. But what I took from it is, well, this is what how you should approach the game. And I was able to have success, not because I was the best player or I understood the matchups, but I understood the fundamentals of the game. And I entirely attribute that to watching competitive video games and commentary on that, because I do think it's so applicable. Now, one of the things that I will say that I want to get your take on too is, as much as I enjoy these games, and I don't think that having kind of the competitive movement come along has really dampened my love for these types of games, but I find myself actually spending far more time watching these games than playing them. And it's interesting because there's so much better matchmaking technology that it accommodates people of all skill levels. But I just really enjoy sitting down and seeing really experienced players and getting their take on what's going on. Like you said, hearing the commentary, I almost get more joy out of watching that than I do playing the games. And I don't know whether that's a good or a bad thing, but that's kind of how I've chosen to interact with the community of I'm just a really passionate consumer, knowing that I'm never going to be at the skill level to really be a great contributor.
I think it's a good thing, actually. I had the same kind of thing. At heart, I'm a very competitive person. Aaron knows this. Back when we were kids, I didn't really know how to handle the fact that I was so competitive with these kinds of games. And as I've gotten older, it's gotten better. And I realized that I'm not going to be the best at everything. I'm not going to be the best StarCraft player. I'm not going to be whatever. And once I got over that kind of a mental hump, it was interesting because now I can watch these kinds of games. I can play Overwatch. I can get destroyed. And I want to do well, but I realize, you know what? I'm never going to put enough time into it to really be number one. Right. And I just don't want it. It's not my priority. It's other people's priorities. That's great. And like I said, I can watch and consume these things and understand what they're doing and really appreciate all they're doing and really be glad that it's not me, but also be glad that I'm watching.
Right.
And likewise, I can sit on, like in Overwatch, for example, they have competitive play that just came out. I haven't played any of it. I just don't really have an urge to do that. But I do have an urge to play the regular Overwatch, the unrated games, where I just play, I lose, I can mess around here, I can try a different character there. I know that me not playing a healer might hurt our team, but I just kind of want to have fun. And I get different things out of it. I get more of the efficiency stuff out of watching that I know that I can't actually do. And it's one of the reasons why I think that I try and do speedrunning best I can. It kind of scratches that itch as well. But it's also, since we started the podcast, I haven't done a lot of it. And that's just kind of how it works out. I'm just as fulfilled watching them as I am doing other things, because I know I just don't have the time or effort. And it's the entire BCG mindset we always mention here. So that's kind of how I feel about it. But I guess to kind of continue the thread here, I did want to talk a little bit about Major League Gaming MLG and see how... Because that was really one of the biggest things that pops out in my mind as far as a first attempt at starting to legitimize, and legitimize might be an unfair word, but legitimize this kind of professional competitive gaming things. When you start getting the StarCraft 2s, you start getting the Counter-Strikes, or I'm sorry, Counter-Strike Source or CSGOs, all those kinds of games coming in and playing more competitively. And Aaron, what do you think? So knowing that MLG is around, knowing that recently they were actually purchased by Activision Blizzard, and ostensibly to have these big kind of ESPN video game kind of approaches, what do you think? Is that a good move? Where do you see MLG going? I know right when they were picked up, I don't think it was doing super well necessarily.
Right.
Is it going to go anywhere?
It's a great question, and I wonder about this more than anything else. So from just the sheer viewership perspective, if you look at some of the biggest competitive gaming events that are online, the audiences that are watching these are in many cases as big or bigger than some professional sports events that people are, big salary players are playing in, that are clearly sustaining themselves. The viewership is there. To me, it is obvious that there is a demand that is out there, and there are enough people who are just like us that would consume this stuff. That you got to start there, right? If people aren't interested, you can't go anywhere. So there's an interest level. Now, the question I have, and this is where I become very uncertain, is how do you make money off of that, right?
Exactly.
How do you create a business where it's one thing that Evolution is online and it's free every year, and yeah, places take donations, but what's the percentage of people that really donate to that? People are watching this. I think that all of the people who are sponsoring and have gone this route in the past, they have not figured out the business model. Now, I know people are going to come back.
You can't do advertising as easily with ad blockers.
You can't. And people, I think, I know people may come back at us and say, here's an example here, here's an example there. But the reality is, if you listen to the discussion from these companies, Major League Gaming and others among them, I think the reality is that people are subsidizing this because they believe in that there are legs, that it can go somewhere, fully acknowledging that it's not there yet. I don't know right now the types of sponsors that are out there, right? You get the energy drink sponsors, you get the keyboard and mouse and computer accessory sponsors, but it really hasn't branched far beyond that. I really want to see Activision Blizzard succeed at this. I really do, because I love the content, and I think that there's something there. I've actually, not from a video game context, but I think I may have mentioned on the podcast in the past, I've done commentary for online coverage of some of our Netrunner tournaments. I love doing it. I would love if I had a video game that I was passionate about, that there was a niche. I really would love to do that as well. And so I want, it's a community that I want to be involved in, but I just don't know whether they're going to figure out how to make enough money. You mentioned StarCraft 2 earlier. That was probably the biggest example in the past few years for me of something I would watch very regularly, but I didn't spend any money on it at all, aside from the fact that I bought a $60 game once every couple of years as they released the new versions. And I almost look back at it now, and Blizzard at the time, a lot of people were kind of up in arms of, oh, wait, you're going to split this into 3 games and charge me 3 times?
Right.
When I look at how many hours of enjoyment I've gotten out of StarCraft between both playing and watching, I almost feel guilty that I've spent so little money on it. And that's kind of where I look and say, how, if we're spending $180 over the course of a 5-year cycle, there's no way to sustain this.
But you're approaching it from that professional mindset. You're a professional. You make good money. You can sustain yourself. And I think one of the difficulties here is you've got this weird market that's kind of split amongst, I guess, juveniles in many ways, or like very young adults, into people who are just getting on their feet, just getting out of college, or just starting their own jobs, all the way to people like us who've been around the block a couple times. And I think that's very difficult because in the millennial age, you have, I'm going to genericize here, but you've got these millennials that still have a sense. Some of them pretty much still have a sense for a lot of these things should be free. In many cases, the stuff I consume should be free. And granted, we've tried recently to have this model of consumption, like, hey, you should pay video game players that Humble Bundle, for example, pay what you think it's worth to you. Right. And I think those are starting to work really well, but traditional mindsets for marketing and things like that, advertising and all of that, doesn't really work in this world because most of us have ad blockers. Let's face it, I hate advertising. Yep. So that kind of kills it. And then you've got these gamers that come out, and if they're 19, 20, 21 years old, you can offer them free PCs, you can offer them free graphics cards, you can offer them free keyboards and mice and headsets and whatever. You can pay them $15,000, $25,000 a year, and heck, that's a great salary, especially for 19 and 21 years old or whatever. But when they start getting to be 23, 24, 25, and their peers are coming out of college, starting to make $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, and so on, $1,000 a year, now it becomes more of a difficult scenario because they're thinking, oh, am I ahead or am I behind the game?
Where are we going with this?
Right. And so I think that's what they're struggling with right now. You have to figure out how – certainly there is a market. Absolutely. This is $1 billion+ market across the thing. And the reason that Twitch is just killing it in this space, and that shows the fact that Twitch in any given day has more viewers and more of like a attach rate effectively than many large like ESPN-like stations. Absolutely. Means there's a market. You just have to figure out how to approach that market. In particular, what gets them excited. When subscriptions came out for Twitch, I was concerned that they wouldn't get a lot, but now you see almost everyone that's willing to consume content can pitch in $5 a month. It's not really that much. Right. for the people that they really enjoy entertaining them. And I start to think that this is going to be good. They're going to eventually get there. The question is, to your point, are people still willing to invest in it? Right now, it's been very kind of a VC heavy, and I'm not saying VC in exactly the venture capital TM kind of an approach, but I mean, there are a lot of people coming into this stage realizing they want to buy in with some equity initially. They want to own these kinds of companies. They want to be there when it launches off. And I think the first renaissance we saw with StarCraft 2 and all of that with MLG kind of has ended in a way. It's kind of hurt. You're starting to see the Hucks and a lot of these players that are moving on, doing new things, or they're not able to support themselves in many cases, or they realize, hey, my contract with my gaming team isn't all that lucrative. And oh my gosh, what am I going to do when I'm 35? Well, and that's something that we're all trying to realize. But I think there is certainly a niche area where people can really attack this problem head on, with a new perspective, and make it an extremely competitive, compelling, and lucrative area. And I mean lucrative in the sense that you can actually run a business off of it. And then you're going to start seeing more of this kind of coverage. Do I think it's going to, and I know they're trying to put this stuff on television at some point, like ESPN 8, the Ocho, whatever it is. I don't think that that's going to honestly work, because I think that the consumer mindset for us is, I want to watch the game I want to watch, when I want to watch it, how I want to watch it, where I want to watch it.
And I don't want commercials, right?
No commercials at all. So, for example, my game's done quick things. I can't watch 24/7, obviously, so I watch the videos on demand when I want to watch them, how I want to watch them. Yeah, I'm gonna donate. I donate to every single one of these. And so they're gonna get their money. They're gonna get their input into it. But I'm also gonna consume that content when I want to consume it. Same thing with podcasts. Everyone watching here, we see the people that are coming out and watching and listening. Thank you, for doing that, of course. But what's interesting is I'm seeing people go back and watch episodes, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, many, many months after we've produced them.
Absolutely.
And so they're going at their own pace, and that's the reality here. You have to figure out how to, granted, we're not trying to monetize it.
No.
So it's easy for us. We're just doing this out of our own passion. But there are ways that you can monetize that, and people have to just think differently. And you can't have the people that are doing this traditionally use the exact same tired methodologies to try and make money out of it.
Yeah, I agree. So what do you, the listeners, the viewers, think? Certainly competitive gaming and the landscape and what that's provided has come a long way since we started way back when in our video game beginnings. But we'd love to hear from you. So certainly find us on businesscasualgamers.com. Let us know what you think. Hit us up on Twitter. We would love to hear from the audience. So with that, let's, Chris, why don't you transition us into our Founded on Twitch segment? Bring us into somebody who has opened my eyes to the world of all things Overwatch.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. And I know this guy's been around for a while, but I only recently found him. And one of the things I want to mention before we do this is, we're going to start getting better about trying to link in the people that we with Twitter and such, the people that we try to highlight here in these things. If you like the people that we send you to, and you like watching them, you end up following them, please take the time to let us know, let them know that you found out about them here. It's really important to us to help kind of grow this group. And I know Bikeman ended up finding that we had talked about him a couple episodes ago. That was a great interaction. I really appreciate those of you that helped him find those kinds of things. So the person in this particular episode of Founded on Twitch is Seagull. And you can find him at twitch.tv/A_Seagull, just like the bird. And he's actually a really compelling streamer when it comes to Overwatch in particular. It sounds like he's been doing these games for a while, but I picked him up a couple of weeks ago, started watching him. He was actually taking place, he's part of a competitive team for Overwatch, and I watched a couple of the more competitive matches with some commentating and all of that. He is a really cool, not only is he a really good player, he's an insane Genji, insane Hanzo, really good at Pharah. And watching him play these things has really helped me understand the game a lot better, because things that I had never really understood were, like I mentioned before, were methodologies to approach this game. He does it, and he's really good about talking things through. Like, hey, you know what? I know it's really easy for you just to go run in the middle of a fair and throw things here, but here's why you want to do this, or here's why you want to do that. And you see him, practice what he preaches right there in those games when you watch him. And I think, people started to see that when they started to watch his competitive stuff. He was actually destroying a whole bunch of people. He team killed the entire team by himself. It's really cool to see how he approaches this particular thing. And he sounds like he's a very down-to-earth person. He could very easily, and I think he'll mention many times, many of his compatriots don't stream.
Right.
Because number one, when you stream, you give away your play styles. You give away, if you stream as a team, you give away your methodologies, your strats as a team. That can be very killer as a competitive player. But he willfully does this because, I think obviously he makes some money off of it, but he really willfully does this. I think part of it is because he wants to help us as viewers get better at Overwatch and really be entertained by him. And he's not the kind of streamer that's like all up in your face and screaming and being super entertaining. He's just a guy you want to learn from.
Yeah, and it's funny. I checked him out after I told Chris Overwatch is a game I'm interested in. I think it's really cool, and I just wanted to kind of see again how it was played. Let me understand the game a little bit better. And I remember, so I was watching one of his streams. And I'm going to butcher some of the character names because I'm still getting used to it because I haven't played. But one of the things that I was watching him talk about was you had a team on the other side with Mercy, the healer, right?
Right.
And he was basically, so Mercy, as any good healer should be, was in the back trying to heal all of the teammates. And he specifically said, all right, watch, I'm going to go after Mercy. I'm going to target her first so that basically once she goes down, everybody else can mop up. Now, I know this is probably a basic strategy, kill the healer first. Mm-hmm. But it was so interesting seeing how far back she was and how disciplined he was of, I know I'm going to soak up damage. Like you said earlier, I may have to trade off, but by me taking down this one healer, the rest of my team is going to take down theirs. And you just saw it, rapid succession. The minute Mercy went down, you saw the rest start dropping like flies.
Right.
And it was so fun to watch and just say, okay, I understand that if I'm in that position, I understand what to do. There was another match. I think the character, is it Widow? Is that...
Yeah,
okay.
Widowmaker, is it?
Yes, Widowmaker. Okay, so she was like wreaking havoc on their team. They said, okay, I'm going to switch to this character because I need somebody who can take care of Widow. And you see him like really, literally, the minute he gets back in the game after the character change, just goes straight for, I think there were two of them that were on screen, and just goes straight for those. And you started to see, whereas the game was totally in the other team's favor before, you could start to see his team climbing back into the game, all because, like you were saying earlier, he had enough information about the matchups to say, this is the character that's going to get me back in the game. This is going to get our team. This is going to lock down this character that's giving us trouble. And you started to see the momentum completely shift. And as I was watching this, like you said, I learned so much as a person who's never even played this game. It really increased my interest level. And so, as a fan and as somebody who really appreciates the content, I certainly was grateful to be able to have a source to watch that obviously was both entertaining because I thought the game was cool, but to actually have a better understanding of, if I jump into this game, I'm not going to be completely ignorant just saying, okay, what are their moves again? Now, I will say, I think of all the characters that I saw, what's the girl with the rocket launcher and the jetpack?
Pharah.
All right, Pharah's my girl.
Yeah,
Pharah, when I saw her, I was like, that's my jam. This is who I'm using when I get in the game. Now, I know I need to learn other characters so you can switch and all that, but I said, I know who my starting point is.
Yeah, it's funny because she is listed as easy as far as all the characters have like an easy, medium, hard kind of ranking. And although she is listed as easy, and she's a relatively simple character to pick up, watching Seagull play her is unlike any other Pharah I've ever seen. As far as
I
just
saw
being
him
able to get
chain 6 kills together by just getting people in the building, and you're doing everything a good rocket launcher character should do. And I was like, all right, this is it. You sold me. Yeah,
I mean, so like I said, if you're interested in competitive gaming and watching some things. And you don't want to watch the League of Legends, you don't want to watch the StarCraft 2s, you want to watch something that's more, I guess, kind of hip, for lack of a better term. Try Overwatch. I think Overwatch, I mentioned it before, I think it's a really good game to watch. The team atmosphere, it's Team Fortress 2 mixed with a couple other things, but it's really unique. Blizzard has done a great job, certainly in the competitive mode, of allowing it to be very easy to see different players, whatever. And when you look at things like Seagull and you watch him play, try to soak up what he's doing and why he's doing it, how he's changing in some cases, when he's not changing and how he's doing these things. It really can help you kind of get better, I think.
Definitely. So shout out to him. I really appreciate it. Certainly as a viewer, appreciate the information. So with that, let's transition into our game assignment. So last week we had our PlayStation retrospective, and we went back in time to some of the classics that frankly, for the most part, I would say ended with the PS1 era. So Chris, I assigned you Spyro. Tell me about this. Is a game you'd never played before, new to the genre, or not the platforming genre, but new to that franchise. Tell me about your experience with Spyro.
Yeah, I really liked Spyro. It's one of those kinds of games where I found it so easily approachable by anyone. Like, I could enjoy it, as I am right now. I could have my kids enjoy it potentially. A lot of fun kinds of things went on. In many ways, it reminded me of Ratchet and Clank. When you're going around collecting things. And the environments were really interesting, very rich. I found the controls to be pretty good, even though I played it with a dual analog stick, but I went back and recalled that it actually came out before the DualShock actually came out. So even for kind of where it was in the time frame, it seemed pretty good to me. Now, I won't lie. I think that the graphics they were very good at the time, I'm sure.
Very dated.
A little bit dated, a little bit difficult. And I want to know if you can catch on the one thing that drove me absolutely nuts about the game.
I don't know that I can. I'm very curious to hear.
It was the voice acting of the dragons.
I could see
whenever
that.
you pick the dragons, they had like, "Hi, Spyro, I'm gonna go." I just want to. Oh, I hate that so much.
We've had a great month of the best of the best voice acting. It seems we've been exposed to.
It's why I really did. Granted, I didn't get to play the game a lot, but I really did enjoy the game. I'm going to go back and play some more. I understand there are many other ones, and Spyro's kind of come back in some other areas, so I think that's really good. I was extremely happy with it. It is a very good game. It reminds me, like I said, it reminds me a lot of Ratchet and Clank in many ways. That kind of just a downright fun game that's easily accessible, that's not taking itself too seriously and whatnot. I just kind of hope that you can turn off the voices on these things, because
one of these days
drives me absolutely insane.
When they bring it back, they will hopefully make selectable voices or real voices other than just the aw shucks Banjo Kazooie level.
Exactly. So I think, would I recommend it? Yes, I definitely would recommend it. I think it would be really nice, a good candidate for a kind of a remastering in a sense, to kind of give the same level. Like I said, I absolutely love the Ratchet and Clank kind of remastering. So new graphics, granted graphics aren't everything, but new graphics make it more approachable, and with some of the things. Now, one thing, I will harp on this again because I feel the need to do this as well. The one thing that I did dislike, that you will hear me talk about every single game from Ocarina of Time all the way to Mario 64, is the 3D-ness and the camera does drive me absolutely insane. And I died too many deaths trying to make a jump that I thought I could make that I didn't. And that's the bane of my existence when it comes to 3D games. And I think the day that we figure out a way to better handle that is the day that I am so much happier as a player of a 3D game. And maybe this is something that VR will help. I don't even know.
Sure.
I've just come to accept the fact that this is just the way it's going to be. So I don't really hold it against Spyro necessarily, like any other game, but it was a detractor overall for sure.
Makes sense.
So Aaron, you actually had a similar game. We asked you to go back and play Crash Bandicoot, and the original Crash Bandicoot for PlayStation 1, especially since we had seen it come up recently, and we know they're going to be making some remakes here in the future. So what did you think?
So I actually had the time. I got all the way through Crash Bandicoot, and I especially wanted to play this in light of the announcement that they are going to remaster. And it was interesting. So several thoughts on this. The first one is, I am very curious what they do with the remake. And they've said kind of a reimagining. I don't know whether this is going to be just kind of a graphic refresh or a performance update, more so that, or whether it's really kind of a real ground up. This is going to be very different, almost like Final Fantasy VII Remake, where it's not the same game, just prettier. I don't know how you remake that game. I really don't. I kind of, after playing through the entire game, I think that to have any chance to capture the old audience and the people who are fans of that franchise, I do think you have to play pretty close to the original, and you got to stick with it. I think it's a good game, and let me talk about kind of the aspects that they have to build on. I think that I split Crash almost into two entirely separate games. You have some levels that you basically are Crash, and you're either starting from the top of the screen, moving your way down, or at the bottom of the screen, moving your way up. Those are roughly half the levels. And then you have others where it's more of what I'll call a vertical platformer, where you're going from left to right, but you're moving up in the level and traversing, different obstacles. I think that those vertical levels are significantly better in terms of design, fun, all of challenge. I think that they really have something to build on there. And I don't know how they're going to do this remake, whether it's just literally take the same levels and put a fresh coat of paint and do some different things. But I think those levels, I immediately just looked at those and said, I remember what's fun about this game. It immediately clicked with me. I had a great time with those. I thought that the fact that the performance was actually much better than I was expecting. I didn't remember the game very well. For a PS1 era we talked about it last week, that was plagued by loading. Crash, from a performance standpoint, was really smooth. It didn't have a slowdown. Some of the problems that plagued others, it felt very natural. I didn't feel like I was playing a PS1 era game. I would say for the levels, on the other hand, where you're going from the top of the screen to the bottom or the bottom up, the camera never felt right. And I think part of this was probably intentional for the time, where they were trying to, get you to memorize the level and know that the obstacle that you have to move around as you're dodging the boulder, you have to move to the left side of the screen.
Right.
I felt very frustrated by that part of it. And so I feel like those levels are kind of a relic that if they literally just do that again, I don't think I am down to play that as a remake. I found it frustrating. I found it kind of artificially inflating the difficulty of the game, where I would have preferred just better designed levels, like the left to right ones. So I'm really curious to see. I feel like they could still make those levels fun. It felt like the camera was always just a little too close to where if they would have zoomed it out a touch, I felt like it would have been just right. But what I also don't know is, are the levels designed in such a way where that literally gets rid of any challenge to where you just don't have fun anymore? I don't know. But I think if they want to have any chance, and if I were looking for one area where they could significantly upgrade the game from the original, I think they have to focus on the camera for those particular levels.
I think they can actually do that because, the new Ratchet and Clank, I know I mentioned that a lot, has some of those kind of you're running into the screen type moments where, you don't know what's coming, and that kind of creates some level of suspense there. But they give you enough time to react to things, and that I felt was easily doable. And I think they could probably go back and make that a little bit tighter, so that you're not, to your point, you're not really like feeling like you have to memorize what's coming at what point. You're just kind of reacting to things at a normal pace.
And that's exactly what it kind of boiled down to in some of the levels, where I just said, okay, I'm going to die partway through. I'm going to remember where I was when that happened, and just kind of memorize my way through this level. Now, I think kind of the important question, especially given that this one is going to get a remake, where does Crash Bandicoot fall in the genre? If you remade this game, is this going to really be a top-tier platformer in the modern environment? And what I would say is, I think, in my mind, as a big fan of the platforming genre, I think you have two franchises that stand out as the clear tier 1 games. If you like platformers, everybody should buy every game in these franchises. And I think those two franchises are Mario, obviously, and Rayman. I think Rayman is criminally underrated. Personally,
it really is.
I actually prefer the Rayman. If you look at Rayman Origins and Legends, I actually like those more than any of the Mario games. I think they are absolutely exceptional, both because of how good the game is, but also the two-player aspect to it. Those games are absolutely head and shoulders to me above any other platform I've ever played. What I would equate Crash Bandicoot to, though, I think this felt very much like a Donkey Kong Country to me. In fact, when I was playing the left to right levels, I honestly, that was it was so evocative of Donkey Kong Country. The secrets that you could find, it really brought me back, and I honestly wanted to play Donkey Kong Country.
The crates kind of like barrels.
Exactly. So, and I think Donkey Kong Country has survived through multiple console generations. Obviously not the same level of success that Mario's had, but I do think that it could carve itself a niche if they wanted to, if they find that this re-release does well. I think that there's something there, and there's enough space in the genre where a mascot like Crash Bandicoot that has enough older fans like us that remember the games fondly. The gameplay is good enough, I feel like, that they have something they can build on. That being said, I think unless they really kind of rethink some things, I do think it's going to be relegated to that second tier platformer status.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see whether, both how does the re-release sell, and do they think that there's enough new ideas, enough momentum behind what they do with that to actually take this franchise and make a new game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have the same questions. Are people going to buy this game? Are they just going to be the nostalgic ones that played it back in PS1 days? Or are you going to get some new expanded, coverage from people who'd never played it before? It's yet to be seen. I think that they have a chance to make this very, very good, and I think it's we are at a dearth of for really good platformers, I think, overall. And despite the fact that you mentioned some very good ones there, but we don't get a lot of these kinds of games, so that's probably why Ratchet and Clank did so well. And I'm hoping that Crash Bandicoot does similarly as well when it releases. But we just don't know any details yet, so it'll be interesting to see.
Absolutely. So with that, we'd love to hear what you think. If you've played these games, if you've had any recent experiences, certainly with Crash Bandicoot, what do you think about the upcoming remake? If you've played it recently or just have memories of it, we'd love to hear your take on what that might be, or if you agree with our take on maybe what some of the things that they could improve on might be. So with that, let's talk next week's game assignment. So we're going to kind of keep this on theme in terms of what we've been talking about from a competitive landscape, and we're gonna play some fighting games this week. So Chris, you're going to go the throwback route, and you're going to get to have the live the dream moment of playing all of your favorite Street Fighter characters. We're going to give you Street Fighter 2 Turbo. I'm going to be kind enough not to give you the original.
I love the Turbo.
So you can get Bison, all the bosses that have their names shuffled up. That's a great story in and of itself. But when was the last time you suited up as one of the original Street Fighter 2 games?
Oh my gosh, probably 1996.
Nice.
7. I don't know. Been a long time.
Who's your
time.
go-to? That's what I need to know.
It depends. I was a Ken guy for a whole bunch of time, and I really wanted to like Guile. I really wanted to get good at Guile, so I'll probably try him this time as well.
Oh,
so bad.
Let's see how many times you hear that sound over the next 2 week
period.
lot.
An absolute lot. Yeah, and Aaron, again, we're going to do something similar to you, but this is one that I've actually never played this one, this particular instance, but I want you to try out Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. I think that's going to be a good one for you.
So this came up, and I'm somewhat ashamed to admit this, but this ties well into our earlier conversation. I have owned this game for the better part of probably 2 to 3 years, and I have literally never taken it out of the packaging. Now, I will tell you, I played a little bit of Marvel vs. Capcom 3. I know every tier list in terms of characters. I know all the I know everything about this game. But I always spend all my time watching this. This is one of my Evolution favorites. I have watched this game to death, but I never have actually played it. So I am going to remove this from my pile of shame, put it in my PlayStation
with all the PS4
3.
games.
Exactly, with all my PS4 games that are collecting dust as well as I don't have a system. But I am going to finally put this in the PlayStation and give this a test run and report back. I already know the team. I am going to be playing Team Zero May Cry, as it is known. It is the classic team of Zero from the Mega Man series in the first spot, followed up by Virgil of Devil May Cry fame, who is the most overpowered character imaginable, led by Dante with all of his shirtless Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle action, diving in to play the guitar with a super or with an assist move that is evocative of Captain Commando, where it literally just throws up a full screen move that completely boxes out the enemy. Zero May Cry is the Team Scrub from Marvel vs. Capcom 2 that I was affectionate for. So can't wait to give this a try.
Very cool, very cool. And I will say, in this theme in the long term, it's probably not going to be anytime soon because they're stupid expensive. I think we should go for the Neo Geo AES and go for like some Samurai Spirits, Samurai Showdown sometime.
Can't wait.
That would be really, really fun to play. But Hayomaru is a really cool character. Anyway.
So with that, we're going to bring episode 14 to a close. We hope you've enjoyed it. As always, please, as we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, check us out, businesscasualgamers.com. Rate us on iTunes. Find us on YouTube. We've got new content coming out all the time. Follow us on Twitter. And we will see you all in 2 weeks.
Thanks all.